Okay, so if there are no questions, what I want to do in this session is I want to just go over the exercises that we did all together in a little bit more detail. I want to talk about some variations on the exercises that we did together, and if we have time, I want to briefly run through one of these exercises together so we can kind of get a feel for how one would go about running an exercise like this and what kind of feedback you would want to give to students about this. So, the exercise that we just did is this playing card demonstration exercise, and what you saw was kind of you saw a little bit of two different versions. So the demonstration version, which is most of what I did, is just when your goal is to kind of show how flowing works and how arguments end up getting written down on the flow. And to do that, all that I would do in class is I would usually bring a physical deck of cards, and I would do a round of this activity where I would just read off cards and I would improvise the speech as I go based on the cards that I draw. So I would say, like, there are two links, card, card. There are two impacts, card, card. And you kind of saw the end product of that process. If you want, it's fairly easy to prepare it in advance as well. That's also a reasonable option. But the goal of this is, it's the simplest version of it, which is you just want to show how the arguments that you're saying from your deck of cards end up translating to a flow, which you could write on the board or have on your projector or something like that. After running through this activity once, like we just did, what I usually like to do to reinforce the flowing component of the skill is to do the same activity. So again, just improvise the speeches with the cards, but not show them what the right way to flow it is, and just kind of have them give it a try and write down their own version of how they think it should be flowed. So the goal of that is to reinforce the flowing skills that I was describing in the very beginning of the session, where I was talking about keeping stuff organized, keeping arguments lined up with each other, making sure there's enough space between arguments so things don't get crowded. Often students forget to flow in columns, so they will start flowing in paragraphs again, and so this is a good way to course correct them and to reinforce that initial set of ideas about how to write down all of this information. And then if the kids are really into it, which they, in my experience, are in some classes and aren't in other classes, sometimes I will even let them just try to do a full debate, using nothing but these playing cards. So I would obviously give them plenty of time to prepare since they're kind of new to the format, but kind of exactly what the student who contributed did in this last speech, but they would go through all of the speeches and they would read off the playing cards themselves, and then the class would flow along, and then as the speeches are going on, you can inject whatever commentary you need to say something like, oh, it would have been good if you had numbered here, or, oh, you went a little bit out of order when you were responding to these arguments, so you want to make sure you're staying organized. Suggestions like that. So this is some examples of feedback that you can give about the quality of the students' flows. So again, making sure they're flowing in columns, making sure they're lining stuff up, making sure they're leaving space. Using shorthand. So a lot of times I'll have students trying to write out the whole words of the cards even after you tell them not to. Some students, especially if they're artistic, will try to draw a picture of the suit. So they'll draw diamonds or they'll try to draw clubs, and that always takes people forever. And Sometimes it works for people, and usually what I'll say about that is just, you can use whatever shorthand works for you, but it's a good idea to try to use shorthand that's a little bit quicker to write down. And then overall neatness. So just, can you follow? Can you understand what is written down on the piece of paper? Is their flow a total mess? Do you understand what the relationship between different arguments is? And that is all kind of the basic flowing package that you can get at with this particular exercise. When you are giving a speech, yes. So this is a very good question. Usually your goal should be that you want to have a pretty complete record of the debate on your flow. And I didn't mention this to the group, and I should have, but one of the other benefits of flowing is that you can actually keep your flow, after the tournament is over. I think I still have a box somewhere in my house and in a distant corner of my basement that has all of my flows from when I debated in high school. And on every single flow, I would fold them up, and then I would write down what happened in the debate, what were the main arguments, and then I would write down the comments that the judge gave me so that I can go back and I can look at the flow, I can open it up, I can see what happened, and then I can check that against what the judge told me. But to Charlotte's question, the idea of it is you want to have as complete of a record as possible. So if you are talking, then it's a good idea for your teammates to be writing down what you're saying on their flow. And if they can, actually, the best version is what we call backflowing, which is if they actually take your flow and write down your own speech on your flow so that you know what you said. That's super bonus points. But yes, it's as much information as possible you want to retain on your flows. Yep. Other questions about this? Another thing that I want to mention about flowing, and this is on the subject of having them hold on to their flows. I have never tried making this an assignment for students, but I do usually encourage students to, especially if they participated in a debate that didn't go the way they wanted to, so something, either the judge really didn't like their argument or the other team said something that, your team didn't know what to deal with. Having them bring in their flow and actually show you on their flow what happened, what did they say, how did the judge's comments line up with what happened in the debate, and then using the flow to try to redo and improve the speech is a really, really useful set of post-tournament practice strategies. So, if you go to regionals and you have one round that is just really bad, and you got lucky and you did well in the other two rounds, but this one round was just rough, and you need to get your stuff together before nationals. Having the flow is a really, really good way to dissect what went wrong and try to talk through that issue with your debaters and make sure that they fix it for the nationals. Okay, so this is the main flowing exercise that I usually do, and beyond that, the best flowing practice I found is kind of just to have them be flowing all the time whenever you're doing debate exercises. So whenever someone's giving speeches, whenever you're practicing line by line, having people flow along and pay attention is a great way to have them practice their note-taking and their information processing. The rest of these drills have more to do with line by line. And so this drill is the drill that the other group is doing right now with Shanna. And This drill is very basic, and the goal of it is just to practice the structure of line-by-line refutation. So you can organize this in several different ways, but the way I usually do it is I have them split up into groups, and each member of the group will come up with some controversial claim. And it can be anything. It can be chocolate is the best dessert, or it can be Taipei is the best city in Taiwan, or something like that. I don't know. Anything where somebody could present some kind of response. So you have your claim, and then you want to come up with a Toolman-style, piece of evidence and then a warrant. So every student comes up with that. Then the students take turns sharing their controversial claim, evidence, and warrant with the group, and the group will come up with 5 different responses to this argument. So let's say I say, my controversial claim is dark chocolate is the best kind of chocolate, and my group comes up with milk chocolate is better because it's sweet and because you can blend it into other desserts more easily, and dark chocolate production is bad for the environment. I don't know. I'm just coming up with this off the top of my head as an example. So your group would come up with 5 of those, and then the original speaker should flow those arguments, so write them down, and then respond to them in line-by-line format, which would sound something like, my original claim was that dark chocolate is the best kind of chocolate. They say it's hard to mix into dessert. That's wrong. You can put it into a cupcake. It's very easy. There are many dark chocolate cakes. They say it's bad for the environment. All chocolate comes from the same kinds of plants, so this doesn't make any sense. They say, and then you just go down the list and you just answer all of the different responses. If you want to debrief as a class, each group can nominate one speaker and they can kind of share their favorite speech of the group, and then you can talk through some of the common issues that come up when students are practicing line by line. Here are some examples of some kinds of feedback that you can give about line-by-line exercises such as this. So it's usually good to focus on the structure of their speech, because that's, again, it's the core of what line-by-line is. So did the student start by summarizing their original point? Did they then respond to the arguments in order? Did they miss anything? This is a term I haven't mentioned before, but signposting is kind of the term for telling the judge where you are in the debate. So if you're telling the judge, I'm now going to respond to this contention, or I'm now going to respond to their argument number 2. That's signposting, because the metaphor is you're putting up a sign and you're saying this is where we are on the flow. Are they using signposting? Are they doing they say, we say? If they're not using those words, are they showing very clearly what part of the debate they are talking about? Are they numbering? Are they labeling? And then, just as with any other speech exercise, it's useful to give feedback on their delivery. So are they speaking convincingly? Are they expressing their point in a way that is easy to understand? Any questions about line by line, the line by line drill, or feedback you can give about line by line? Okay. One thing I also like to do with this drill is there are some other versions that you can do, and depending on which part of the semester you're in with the students, you can use it to practice different skills. So one version I like to do is the warm-up version of the line-by-line drill. So this is something you could do at the beginning of a debate class or meeting, and if your students are already at a point where they've researched their contentions, they know a good deal about the arguments that they're researching, and we're kind of in the final steps of preparing for a tournament. As students walk in, you can give them a set of responses to one of the contentions they've been preparing and ask them to respond to your responses in line-by-line format. You can give them like a minute of speech time to do this, randomly call on a couple of students to actually give their speeches, and this reinforces the line-by-line skill, but since line-by-line is the structure for all of the rest of the debate to happen, it's kind of the scaffolding on which you build the rest of the arguments, you can use it to practice any substantive issue too. So in this case, you would be practicing their contention, and they would be familiarizing themselves with responses to their contention. And you can also combine it with other exercises. For example, one that I like to do is impact mini debates. Impact mini debates are you take away all the other parts of a contention and you just give each side an impact. So a thing that a contention might end in. So let's say one side might have disinformation and the other side might have civil rights. And so in an impact mini debate, you're stripping away the link and the uniqueness, and we're just comparing kind of which is more important, disinformation or civil rights, fighting disinformation or preserving civil rights. And you can have them give speeches against each other using the line-by-line format to compare those impacts. You can do the same thing with evidence comparison. This is a drill that we will be doing with the students tomorrow while you all talk to Shanna about kind of structuring the semester in terms of your public forum classes. But in this drill, you basically would give your students two pieces of evidence, and their job would be to explain why why the evidence they were given is better than the piece of evidence their opponents were given. And they would use the line-by-line format to make arguments for and against each piece of evidence. And then the last drill, and this is what we're going to do right after we finish with this line-by-line session, is what's called spar debates. And spar debates are basically short debates that don't really use evidence or research, and they focus on kind of a silly topic. And the goal of them is to get people involved in a disagreement that they're interested in, so hopefully the topic will be something sort of silly, and the goal of a spar debate is to kind of combine the Toulmin's model discussion that Shanna did in the morning with this line-by-line discussion I did just now, and use Toulmin's model combined with line-by-line to argue about something kind of silly. So that'll be what we do next, so you'll get a chance to experience that firsthand. But all of these are different activities that you can use to continue to drill line-by-line, while also helping them refine some of the other skills they pick up over the course of the semester. Any questions about that? Sorry, my chat went away for a second. Okay. So we talked about flowing practice, and we talked about line-by-line practice. This drill is designed to target the process of putting together a rebuttal, and specifically identifying which part of a contention an argument is talking about. So that's the part of the discussion where we talked about uniqueness, link, and impact. So this is the exercise I used to do this year, and the topic that we debated this past year was about United States military support to Taiwan. And as you can tell, this is not about that. And I kind of think you can go either way on that. You can either have them put together a rebuttal on the topic, or you could have them put together a rebuttal on a different topic that they find interesting. In this case, I chose marijuana legalization topic because I asked the students at the beginning of the semester about what things they were interested in, and a surprisingly large number of them said they wanted to talk about legalizing marijuana, so I put together this alternative drill. But it's up to you. I think you can reasonably do it about the topic we're debating, or you could do it about something silly. It doesn't really matter. The goal of it is to, again, just identify the parts of a contention. So here we have a constructive on a contention. We have a revenue link, we have a legitimacy link, we have a narco-terrorism impact, we have a cartel violence impact. And so you would provide your students with this, and then you would also provide, so these are quotes from articles that respond to the contention. So here, the premise of this contention is that legalizing marijuana would hurt drug cartels, and that would be good because drug cartels are bad. And these articles provide a response to this. They say legalizing marijuana would not really hurt drug cartels. They say drug cartels don't really do narco-terrorism. And they say that if drug cartels lost marijuana money, they would try to get money from other places. So, again, another no link or no solvency argument. And so you would give your students this, and then you would give them some time to read through these articles and try to put together a rebuttal speech using this evidence and using any additional arguments that they come up with. And you can have them do that in groups, or you could have them do that on their own. The language in these articles was pretty tricky, so I had them do it in pretty large groups. So they were able to split the work up, and they were able to each kind of focus on one of these articles and figure out what it means, and do some Googling and try to figure out what some of these words are. And then we came together as a class, and I had each group share an argument that they came up with. And so this is what we came up with one of my classes. So I was just typing up what they were saying. And like you can see, we reinforced the idea that in a rebuttal you need to number your arguments. We reinforced that it's good to have labels for your arguments. So here you can see the arguments are labeled with no link, and no impact. And then there's a very short summary of the argument, so it's very easy to flow or write down what the argument is. And at the same time, we're practicing a different important skill, which is trying to pull out relevant parts of an article and translating that into speech language or debate language. Questions about this drill? And this drill, I think, if you're looking to assign homework, this is a reasonable drill to assign as homework, but I would be wary about the difficulty level, because this drill in particular that I put together about cartels was quite difficult, and it would have been difficult for them to do on their own. So I was pretty active in walking around and helping people read the articles and understand what the words were and the terminology was. So I think it's fine to assign this as a homework assignment, but just be wary of the fact that, you want to adjust the difficulty accordingly. In terms of feedback, same general idea as what we have talked about in the past. So in addition to these issues, which is, are we labeling and are we numbering our responses? Other feedback that we can give includes focusing on the structure, focusing on the signposting, and if you want to, I don't usually do this with my classes because I usually do this drill pretty early in the semester, but if you're at a point in the semester where you think the students could give a summary speech pretty confidently, or you think they could give it a try, one thing you could do is once this has been written, you could have them try to give a summary speech that tries to respond to these arguments using line-by-line format. And for those, you would give them a bunch of time to prepare, you would work with them, and then a couple of students would give their speeches, and the same kind of feedback that we were looking at earlier about structure, signposting, and delivery for our line-by-line activities, you would also use for this. All right. So any questions about any of this information?
And Anthony, just a quick question. In the actual debate, do you use terminology like link, impact? Do you actually say, there's no link or there's no impact?
So that's a judge adaptation issue. So if you are being judged by somebody for whom that language would mean something, then I think that using that language is helpful because that conveys information very efficiently if both you and the judge are on the same page about what that means. But you do raise a good point, which is if your judges are not familiar with that language, you obviously don't want to use it, and you want to adjust your phrasing to something that would be more helpful for the judge to understand what you're saying. And that rephrasing is pretty easy. So where you would say no impact, you could say misinformation doesn't matter. Where you would say no link, you could say social media does not spread misinformation. Where they said no, non-unique, you could say social media is not a unique contributor to misinformation, right? Same arguments. It's a little bit wordier, but that's okay. The important part is that label is there because it helps when the judge is taking notes on what is being said to identify what part of the other side's argument is being responded to.
Okay.
And that's the nice thing about flowing, by the way. So obviously it helps when everybody knows how flowing is supposed to work and everybody takes notes using the same format. If that's happening, then that's like the gold standard because everybody understands the organization, everybody is following along with the speech. But the beauty of it is, even if the judge does not know how to flow properly or how to flow using the public forum style, it doesn't matter because a proper line-by-line speech is really it sounds just like a speech that's organized and that is being methodical about going through and responding to everything the other side said. So while your language and your terms and your vocabulary you might need to adjust, line by line and flowing is something that you can just keep regardless of what kind of judge you have. So even if you have a judge who has never heard of the idea of flowing before, it's totally okay to give a speech that is based on flowing and line by line because it'll just sound like an organized speech. But yes, good point. Adapting to the judge is very important. Any other questions?
And about concession, if there's a point not being responded, and so that means that it's being conceded. So would that really cause the debate for that team that failed to respond?
No. In fact, because of the time asymmetry, right? So the constructive is 4 minutes and the rebuttal is 4 minutes. So in the summary, you have to deal with everything your opponent said in their constructive and everything your opponent said in their rebuttal, which is 8 minutes worth of arguments, and you have just 3 minutes to do it. It helps that you don't have to explain your stuff from scratch. Like, you can use the arguments you've introduced already, so that helps a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's 3 minutes of time to respond to 8 minutes of arguments. So it's just impossible to respond to literally everything your opponent said. That's why it's super important to make choices. So when you're responding to your opponent's contention, you might only focus on the link, or you might only focus on the impact. And if you do that, you'll be conceding the parts of the contention you haven't focused on. And that's okay, because you don't need to defeat every part of the contention to win the debate. You just need to take out whatever part you think is weakest. And so for that reason, it's good to focus down your speech. You don't need to focus on everything. Now, if you made a mistake and you conceded an argument that is fatal to your own contention, then you're in trouble, and you might have to either rely more on your other contention if you have it, or try to figure out how to weasel out of it somehow. One way that people do it is something called cross applications. So maybe you made an argument somewhere else in the debate that could be a response to the thing you conceded. So you can cross apply it. You could say, it's like, oh, I didn't answer it in this part of the debate, but while I was answering number one, I made an argument that if you apply it over here, it's actually also a response to this. So there's some options. You're not completely out of the game. But yes, generally, when you're defending your own arguments, it's much more important to be thorough.
Okay.
But also, if you, in your constructive, have two contentions, and the other team just totally buried one of your contentions, again, it's totally fine to just be like, okay, fine, they were right about this. We're not going to talk about that contention anymore. We're just going to focus on this one they didn't talk about so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Good question. Emily has a question. Would I elaborate on the impact mini debate? Yeah. So, a uniqueness mini debate, that's kind of weird on this topic, just because, again, uniqueness in general is kind of weird on this topic. But yeah, you can definitely adapt it to be a mini debate about whatever you want. You could do a mini debate about which impact is worse. You could do a mini debate about something totally unrelated to the topic, like you could do something silly like cats versus dogs or something. You could do a definitions mini debate, right? So I think this was something that I don't remember exactly. I think Brian was asking about this earlier. The question was whether it was important to define social media at the beginning, or Bob maybe, I don't remember, sorry. But the question was, is it important to define social media at the beginning of the debate? And I mentioned that the answer was yes, and you can get a lot of benefit out of doing that. But if the definition of a term is contested, you can have a debate about that. I'm sure the definition of democratic values will be pretty contested, so you could have a mini debate about that. But yeah, whatever substantive area you want to develop, you can make them have a mini debate about it, and then practice line by line at the same time. Do we do the line by line flow individually or as a team? Good question. So in US public forum, it would be individual because there's one person giving each speech. Here, it would be as a team because we want all of the different team members contributing to the speech. That actually makes it slightly trickier because you have to coordinate with your team ahead of time. But in practice, you could divide it up pretty easily. Like you could say, hey, you're going to be in charge of the con piece of paper. You're going to be in charge of the pro piece of paper, right? So I'll do line by line on this one. You do line by line on that one. And then you just have one person go first and the other person go second. And then you could divide it up that way. You could also divide it up by contention. You could, those are probably the most logical ways to divide it up. You could divide it up by pro or con, and you can divide it up by contention, I think. That makes the most sense. But as a team is the answer to your question.